Good evening, Zimbabwe, and good evening to our amazing viewers across the globe, across the world, and people in Zimbabwe. I want to welcome you to this second edition of Free Talk in partnership with Frederick Newman Foundation. This program, we believe in free speech. We believe that the people of Zimbabwe can develop and have development if they are allowed to express freely themselves and to talk about issues that are on their heart. Now, in this program, I'm joined in studio via Zoom. I'm joined virtually by a cast of an amazing panelists. Now, I do have on my panel Amanda Ndlovu, the mayor of Harare City Council, although suspended, Jacob Mafume, and Jacqueline Sande, who will be taking us through this topic, this amazing topic that we have this evening, where we are going to be discussing the issue of law being used as a tool of oppression or suppression, especially a case study of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I will be starting with you, Jacob Mafume. Now, we are looking at this topic. What is your opening, submission as we talk about this aspect?
Well, COVID is an extraordinary pandemic. It is a pandemic that has happened in similar pandemics have happened, and we've read them in books, studied them in documentaries, and have been told about the severe restrictions that come with a pandemic. But however, in the context of COVID, in particular in Zimbabwe, there has been questionable implementation of the regulations in as far as they relate to certain spheres of life. Issues like elections, issues like freedom of movement, issues like participation, issues of meetings and selective application of the law, and sometimes heavy-handedness in terms of how the regulations are then implemented or are then pursued, and also the regularity of the regulations and the draconian manner on many other aspects. And this has not been to deal with issues around freedom of expression, freedom of association, but it has become a livelihood issues. Entire industries have been shut down without recourse to protective measures. And by that, I'm talking about the informal markets, I'm talking about the transport system that used to use combis, I'm talking about other industries that might not fit in what we call the formal industries, what used to be called the informal industries. These have been shut down completely and indiscriminately without allowing them to take appropriate measures. And so we have an issue around the implementation of COVID regulations and COVID laws as they relate to the Constitution and, more importantly, relate to issues of livelihoods.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Jacqueline Sande. Jacqueline Sande is a lawyer by profession, and she's joining us here in the room. Now, Jackie, my sister, let us talk about the high reports that have come from the European Union, from other organizations, even the United Nations, that there appears to have been a use of law to stifle democratic spaces, especially in Zimbabwe, where political rights have been denied. What is your view in particular to that aspect?
I don't know which political rights in particular are being referred to. If you can elaborate on that.
We have seen, for instance, just recently, or today, the three young ladies who have been in court. You see Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chimbiri, and other political players who have been arrested for violating COVID regulations, and they're struggling for bail as we speak. These are some of the political rights that have sort of been suspended in this COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, in particular reference to the Joanna Mamombe, the trio who have been arrested, I think basically, yes, COVID restrictions are used to violate or to restrict or to curtail the movement or the exercise of the rights of political players, if you're referring to Joanna Mamombe and the trio. But also, it would seem that they are also not complying with the requirements for convening. Could it be a demonstration or whatever they will be doing? They are doing it outside also of even the general laws of convening a demonstration. You know that you just don't decide to come into town and demonstrate without seeking police clearance and all that. So in as much as we have to look at both sides, in as much as they may be selective application of COVID-19 restrictions in terms of who gets arrested for convening a meeting and who doesn't, we would also want to urge political players to abide by the rules and regulations of this country, which are prerequisite before one can convene a meeting or a demonstration or a political gathering.
Okay, no, we'll come back to you and have that conversation. But we also joined by Amanda Ndlovu. Amanda is a lawyer and she practices her trade in Moyo. And I want to welcome you, Amanda, and thank you very much for joining us. But Amanda, I know we met on Clubhouse and we had this discussion of lawfare, where the law is being used as a weapon to ensure that people have a hegemony in power and maintain a stronghold in political spaces. Now, what is your opening remarks on this particular issue, where we are saying that law has become the center of hedging dictatorships in Africa?
Okay, thank you so much for having me, Blessed. I'm quite looking forward to our conversation again today. My opening remarks on this is that I think law in democracy is a very powerful component, just naturally the way that and in as much as it can be a tool of freedom, something that encourages and promotes freedom amongst people, it can also be a weapon of, oppression and and us finding a balance between the use of the law, like Jackie did mention in her sentiments, that finding that balance and that measuring is the important part. So my own perspective when we talk about COVID-19 regulations and the application of them is that this becomes kind of a test of democracy, a way for us to evaluate where do we stand as a country in terms of the application of the law, in terms of the making of policy. Something like COVID-19 is something that took every single country by surprise. There's no country where there aren't rigorous debates about policy making that apply to a particular citizenry, apply to their economic conditions, apply to, you know, the way that people live. So I do really see it as an opportunity for us to evaluate, you know, how well we are doing in terms of our constitutional democracy and lawmaking. Now, in terms of selective application, you know, we can't run away from that. We do see it in some cases that are treated unequally. You mentioned the issue of the MDC trio. To me, that's an issue of bail and the rights around that. In my experience in practice, it's not, I can't say that there's been a blanket abuse of that issue. I've had many clients who had no problem getting bail, even after they had been previously denied bail, because you do have a right to liberty before you've been convicted of any crime. And so when you have these more, you know, politically aligned and charged cases, then we do see a difference in the way that our law is being applied and treated. So I do think it makes for interesting conversation for us to unpack what's going on there.
Amazing. Now, Mafume, I want to come to you, Jacob, and say, what is your submission, Jacob? Because you've been arrested, and you have also seen the conditions of the prisons and during this COVID pandemic time. But our focus is on, is law being used as a tool of oppression in Zimbabwe? Jacob.
Yes, I mean, that is beyond question at all. Look, it is the only country in the world that has banned elections. I mean, elections are so sacrosanct. We've got 24 wards in Harare without representation right now, as far as council is concerned. We have over 14 MPs and constituencies that have been taken out of the system by the withdrawals. They have no representations, and elections have been basically banned in Zimbabwe. We've only got one political party that is allowed to have its meetings. The other political parties are not allowed to have their meetings. Their meetings are banned, or if they hold them, they are arrested post facto. The trio that Jackie was talking about were arrested for having a press conference outside Rotten Row. And if you look at the footage of that press conference, they were physically distanced, they had masks on, they were complying more than other parties who are being exempted, yet they were still arrested. And Jacob, the examples are
when you say other parties, can you be elaborate? Because we want to have conversations that have evidence and facts.
ZANU-PF has been holding meetings. They've been from all levels, from the bottom upwards, Politburo, Central Committee, and some of the MPs. There's I think an MP in Mashonaland Central who had a fully videoed meeting where they were singing happily, oblivious to COVID itself and oblivious to the COVID regulations. And this is a direct, nitpicking of the law or selective application of the law. And were it an MDC party member to do that, they will immediately be claimed on, or any civic society organizations were to do that, they will be immediately claimed on. But these other meetings are allowed to go ahead without any punishment, without any censor. And the list goes on. But one of the fundamental crimes that is happening against the Constitution and civil liberties is the banning of elections. We are no longer holding elections. People are unrepresented. There is chaos in the wards. There is uncertainty in the electoral system. And yet all around us, South Africa is holding by-elections. Zambia held by-elections, Malawi held elections. Everywhere in the world, elections are being held following COVID regulations. Then if you leave the political arena, go to in the informal sector. Now, the informal sector forms the basis of our transactional economies in Zimbabwe. That has been clamped down completely. Yet shops like OK, TM are allowed to open for as long as they comply with regulations. The Kombi transport sector, which is another major source of livelihood, Kombis have been banned unless they affiliate to ZUPCO, and a limited number are allowed to affiliate with ZUPCO, throwing a lot of livelihoods into disarray. So this is an oppressive manner. It is a draconian way of putting into place COVID regulations that is not being done anywhere else in the world except here in Zimbabwe. And that is where we have a fundamental problem with the way that the current government, the current ZANU-PF government is implementing the COVID laws. It is not blind. They are very seeing, and they only see the MDC or other undesired sectors of society according to them.
Dear panelists, feel free to jump in where you feel like you want to jump in. So you can just basically raise your hand so that it doesn't become a back and forth from me as I ask questions. Let us have this conversation and explore the issues that are being thrown in. Of course, obviously, I will be holding the chimbo as we speak. But JK, I want to come to you and say, do you see a government that is sensitive in Zimbabwe or a government that is using an opportunity of COVID to maintain its stranglehold in political space?
I don't think that what the measures that are being taken are doing the government any favors. And I would like to agree with my brother Mafume on several counts, in that I do not think that the COVID-19 measures being put in place are sensitive to the plight of the vulnerable and the poor and those who are in the informal sector. That for me is a bone of contention, because it has shown us a side of the government which is only concerned about those in the formal sector. But if you look at the structure of our economy, you'll find that 70%, I think being 70% is generous, it could be more. 70% of the employed adults in Zimbabwe, of the employed population in Zimbabwe, is employed in the informal sector. But when you look at the COVID-19 regulations, they have sort of favored the formal sector over the informal sector. The informal sector has been totally shut down without any consideration to the plight of those who are poor and those who are vulnerable, who totally rely on, who are surviving from hand to mouth, literally. They survive on their earnings for the day. They do not have any savings set aside. But these are the most affected by the COVID-19 regulations put in place. And for me, I do not think it does the government any favors in terms of how it is viewed by the electorate, because I believe that these are in the majority. And if you are going to have to come up to have decisions that impact your potential voters in a negative way, I don't think you are doing yourself a favor as a government which is in control of the economy and of the state. And for me, I think if things had been done differently, then it would actually, count as a positive in favor of the ruling party. But how they've done things, I think it tends to impact on their image negatively. And I would also want to hammer in on the issues which have been raised by Jacob Mafume. I think I've been vocal about it on my Twitter profile. The arrest of political opponents, and then they get to be denied bail, which should ordinarily, in those instances, I feel that there would be no reasonable ground for denying these players or these accused persons bail, maybe save for the fact that there are voices which oppose or which are seen to be opposing the government. And that, again, I do not think it does any favors for the ruling party. You do not want to be seen as a government which stifles opposing voices, which does not tolerate dissent in a democratic society such as ours, where dissenting voices should be the norm, because this brings about accountability. The role of the opposition should be to bring checks and balances and to ensure that the ruling party is not abusing its powers. But once you then stifle that dissenting voice, then immediately you are then going to earn yourself a badge or a reputation as an autocratic government. And that in itself is not a good thing for the ruling party.
But they have like Mafume said, they have been having unfettered access to political campaigns. Look at the Bulawayo Aquifer just happened recently. There were hundreds of people that were there, and COVID regulations were not even considered. And then you also look at the example that Jacob Mafume gave of an MP whose video went viral. Nothing, absolutely, totally nothing happened. Nobody was arrested. And is this not signs of dictatorship?
I agree with you, Blessed, and that is what I've been saying, that in a democracy such as ours, you do not want to create the impression that you are stifling dissent or you are coming on hard against those voices which speak out against you or against opposing voices. In a democratic space such as ours, and I think in particular for the new dispensation that is there, and the way they came out initially to say we are distancing ourselves from the previous dispensation and how it would conduct business, I would have thought that they would be more tolerant of diverging voices, of diverging views, because that is the only way to bring about checks and balances. And it is a requirement in a democracy to have a vibrant opposition which will keep the ruling party on its toes and ensure that it is accountable for all the decisions that it makes. Therefore, the opposition should actually be encouraged to speak out and to bring to the fore those issues which are of concern. This is how a democracy should function. So you should not have a clampdown on opposing voices if you are saying that you're a democracy. And in accordance with our constitution, I would like to believe that Zimbabwe is a democracy, and therefore there should be no reparations for those who speak out against certain government decisions or policies that they believe are wrong. This should be the norm, because once we have that, then we have a system whereby the government is accountable to the citizens in various ways. We have parliament to do that, with the opposition using various platforms to do that. We have also the civic society. We should also be able to engage with government and bring it to account in terms of policies and decisions that are made on a day-to-day basis that affect the citizens. So it should not be the case that we have selective application of the law. That does not come out well when we are saying that we are a democracy as a nation. It doesn't augur well with democracy to say that this law will apply differently to that person. If we're saying we've got COVID-19 restrictions, then they should be able to apply to everyone, because COVID-19 in itself, it's a pandemic which knows no party. So even if you say that we will ban MDC from convening gatherings, and you allow ZANU-PF to convene gatherings, that will not protect you from the pandemic itself. The consequences of those gatherings which are being convened against COVID-19 protocols and regulations will be felt in the society. So it means that if you have got more than 100 people, they are not observing pro-COVID-19 protocol whatsoever, and they are gathered and they are going to go back into their community, and you're going to see the ripple effect. It might not be immediate, but it will be felt somehow. So it is encouraged for COVID-19 regulations and protocol to be applied evenly across the board.
Amanda, at the center of democracy is the ability for people to elect their leaders of their own choice. Now, we have seen that since the onset of COVID-19, there have been no by-elections. But in as much as there have been no by-elections, the Constitution has been allowed to work in other areas. For instance, the section that allows recalls has been allowed to happen without a law that allows those who have been recalled to go back for election. Now, what is your take on that aspect of democracy and freedom of representation, which also culminates to freedom of speech?
Okay, I completely agree with the sentiments that have been shared in that regard in the past, to say that, well, you know, having elections, that right to choose your leaders is one of the things that we should hold to be unassailable at any given point. I do think that that whole just outright ban of elections, even the way that it was worded to be indefinite, was irregular. You know, it really puts a big question mark and calls into to question what's going on there. Because to me, I don't think the election process is something that's completely out of the question. What's interesting is that our electoral commission, if I'm not mistaken, they had actually set a date for elections to take place. They had come up with, you know, a policy document on how they proposed that they could go ahead with elections in terms of sanitizing at stations, etc. I think if you can open a supermarket as big as Pick and Pay, you can run an election. We are at a point of COVID-19 where we can figure out certain things and allow them to move. So my take is that it's absolutely irregular. And I think what I wanted to build on what Jacqueline was sharing earlier is that there is a fixed standard to how we must assess these things. Everybody, in terms of the Constitution, has a right to administrative justice. That means that when a decision is being made or a decision maker is given the power to make a particular policy decision, there's also a standard by which that decision must be tested. It must be lawful. It must be rational. It must be done procedurally. It must be reasonable. And all of that speaks to, you know, that rational link between what is done and the reason behind it. Why do we need to make a decision on this thing? And is the decision that you've made rationally connected to the purpose that you're trying to achieve? Now, if the purpose we're trying to achieve is you know, representation of people, like what Mr. Mafume mentioned earlier, that right now there are wards that have no councillors. To me, that's an irregular situation, because just because there's COVID-19 doesn't mean there's no more local governance. It doesn't mean there's no longer a need for people to be represented in particular structures. So for me, there's absolutely no reason why there should be a blanket ban of elections. To me, it makes no sense. And which takes me also to the accountability aspect of it, to say, okay, this has happened. Now, so what? What are people able to do? And to me, this is where the judiciary needs to come in very strong. Jacqueline was saying that, you know, it would now be a matter of response in terms of whether it's opposition leaders or anybody who's been affected to be able to have a measure of accountability. We rely on the courts to be able to do that. We rely on the courts to be able to apply that standard that I've just spoken about, to say that, okay, you've said that businesses can come in if they test all their workers. Why? What kind of tests are you going to do? Where are these tests going to come from? Is it rational to expect that people should test before coming into the office? I'm just giving this an example because this is also one piece of legislation that was just done, you know, in such a way, but, you know, it was difficult to implement because nobody understood. What do you mean you must test all my workers? So I get tested, go to work today. I'm going to go on to a Zupco at the end of the day, and you know, where's the rationality in the policy decision that has been made? And that's something that we need to confidently be able to test, because I don't think the intention of democracy was to say once you have a legislator or policy maker, they make a decision and that's it. You know, they checks and balances that are inbuilt in the system for a reason. And I think this conversation is mistaken without us mentioning the judiciary and saying, well, there is a second step to this. If we're not happy with the decision that has been made, we need to be able to go to court.
But Amanda,
we need to be able to, yes, sorry.
Amanda, they've justified that they're saving lives and elections are not worth dying for. And this is a matter of public health. I mean, is that not a fair justification by the government?
It's always a matter of balancing. You see, to me, this is a disproportionate response. Yes, there's COVID-19, but like I said, there are things happening where we were talking about meetings and gatherings that are happening over 100 people. Elections are a matter of going to particular polling stations and wards. You can very easily, come up with policy that enables, certain things to happen without putting people at risk. It's all about the balance, the balancing aspect of it. You could stagger them over a longer period to reduce the numbers. You could have a limitation. There's many solutions that can be done. I think it's a bit, I don't want to say lazy, but then, there are solutions. There's technology. There are ways that we can come up with solutions to achieve a particular purpose. Yes, fine, elections aren't an urgent thing, but they are important enough for us to figure it out. I feel the same way about the court structures, for example. The courts, every time there was a lockdown, were just closed. That's it. We're only hearing urgent applications and bail. And what do? They just remand you to another date. To me, it's simply not good enough when we're talking about policy, because you're denying people access to justice. There's no reason why certain matters couldn't be done on the papers, even if it's not urgent. You do have a right to protect. Right now, we're in an environment where, you can't enforce anything. There's no accountability because, the courts can't help you right now because, okay, well, they've just reopened. But to me, it's that key thing of balance is what is missing. Yes, there's COVID-19. We can't have elections the way that we've known them before, but it's not impossible. It's not an impossibility. So there has to be a willingness to balance certain interests.
Amazing. Now, we're also joined here by Dewa Mavinga, and Dewa is works for a human rights watchdog, which watches human rights across Africa and in Zimbabwe. Now, Dewa, can you just give us a brief overview on how governments, especially in Zimbabwe, have used COVID-19 to entrench authoritarianism, if it has?
Thank you, Blessed, and greetings to the team of esteemed lawyers that I see, Mkoma Jacob, my colleague and friend Jackie, Thelma and Amanda. I think what we are looking at, particularly with Zimbabwe, is a situation where the necessary lockdown mechanisms have been converted and were used to justify a crackdown and a silencing of voices. So, for example, lockdown measures were said to prohibit people from congregating, and the government of Zimbabwe took it specifically to mean no protest whatsoever. For example, we know that last year, the July 31 movement, people wanted to protest against corruption in Zimbabwe, and many of them did it in a socially distanced manner. But the authorities cracked down and arrested people who were protesting on their own, like renowned novelist Tsitsidanga Rembwa, like lawyer and MDC Alliance spokesperson Fadzai Maere, and many others. So these were really targets on small groups of people who were not necessarily violating COVID-19 regulations. This has also happened previously with a small group of opposition activists in Warren Park, where then we saw the arrest and then subsequent disappearance and torture of MP Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chimbiri, and Netsai Marova. So those are clear examples of how the state has cracked down. You know, the crackdown has also been in Bulawayo, in other cities, where the authorities have used excessive force, have quickly resorted to arresting and throwing people in detention, which is actually contrary to the objective of slowing or stopping the spread of COVID-19, because Zimbabwe's detention facilities are overcrowded. And we have repeatedly said that there is a need to decongest those facilities and especially keep people who are otherwise in pre-trial detention in their homes and not arrested. So it has been a way of really punishing, in a way, attacking and cracking down on dissenting voices. And then you juxtapose that and contrast with how the ruling party itself has been given a free rein. So, for example, on 23 December last year, we saw viral images of videos where President Mnangagwa had a huge rally in Chiredzi, which the government spokesperson Nick Mangwana proudly blasted on social media. We saw ministers like the Information Minister Monica Mchangwa throwing a lavish birthday party with no social distancing, no masks, nothing. So the idea that the sons and daughters of ZANU-PF are above the law has been entrenched in the psyche of Zimbabweans, and that only the opposition is the one to be targeted when it comes to COVID-19 regulations. And this has actually given, undermined the respect with which COVID-19 regulations should have been received, because it has been viewed as simply an excuse. And we saw that internationally, blessed, that the UN special rapporteurs, the UN system, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights came out strongly to say Zimbabwe should not use COVID regulations as an excuse to violate the rights to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. So these are huge concerns that are out there, and the government of Zimbabwe can do more to show an impartial approach to the law, and that everyone is equal before the law. This is not actually what people are seeing on the ground. There is a sense that if you are ZANU-PF, you can disregard the law and nothing will happen to you. But if you are perceived to be the opposition or to be civil society, then you are targeted, you are attacked, you are jailed, and you are, there are frivolous charges that often enough do not stand the scrutiny in the courts, but still they are used to harass activists repeatedly. We have got at the moment Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chimbiri, and Netemaro in the courts over and over again on frivolous charges that eventually are dismissed, but people would have lost many days of their liberty, and they would have spent thousands of dollars defending themselves in the court system, which is most unfair.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Is there anyone who wants to come in on this at this juncture?
Yes. What I would like to add is that I've been a visitor to our prisons. As you know, I spent New Year and Christmas in the prisons. It's oxymoronic the way they are dealing with the COVID, so-called COVID violators, because you are then put in a prison that is overcrowded. The truck that takes you from to and fro prison is a huge truck that never fills up. You can be 100 in it, you can be 80 in it, and you are deathly close to each other. You are almost what Paul Matavere used to call 0 centimeters apart. And clearly such a condition and such conditions of detentions are problematic in terms of how you then might catch COVID or spread it if you have it. And also, we have not taken the issue of decongesting the prisons. We need to decongest. Other countries reduced sentences, did amnesties, and decongested the populations in prisons, and also kept the courts open in relation to other, with a view of decongesting the prison population. And that did not happen, and that has not happened. And clearly that simply exacerbates and puts the life not only of the prisoners, but even the prison officials at risk. So I think the way that the punishments have been done on COVID violators has also not been COVID friendly, if one is to abuse the terms. But I need to reiterate that issues of livelihoods or for the informal sector and their right to work, their right to fend for their families, their right to provide for certain other health issues, education, and just to be sustainable as families has been totally decimated by the way COVID regulations have been implemented in the informal sector. And that is not healthy, and that is dangerous, because once you open the doors again, people are so desperate and they are all over the place because they've not had an opportunity to earn a living.
But Mafume, do you believe that the government has reasonable excuse to stop elections?
It has none whatsoever. No excuse. It hasn't stopped anything. It hasn't stopped mass burials of people like Soldier Love. It hasn't stopped gatherings of government officials and their own party. It hasn't stopped the opening of supermarkets. It hasn't stopped the issue of people traveling to and fro. There is absolutely, we are the only country that has banned elections. It's so ironic, and using the Ministry of Health, there's absolutely no excuse. There were issues of the courts. We filed applications in the courts about this thing. I think Tendai BT filed an application. The courts have moved ever so slowly around ordering that this ban of elections is illegal. ZEC itself, which is supposed to be an independent body, has defended the stopping of election when its business is simply to hold elections. And other countries are holding elections, but they are not taking a proactive stance to want to give people elections. It is draconian, it is oppressive, and it is illogical and unreasonable in a democratic society that elections are banned. We had the American elections full of people being held. India, Malawi, everywhere people are holding elections except for Zimbabwe.
Jackie, do you think it's justifiable in a democratic society not to have elections as we face the COVID pandemic?
I don't believe there's any justification, because like all the previous speakers have said, that we see that everything else is still going on as normal. Mass burials are happening, people gathering in large numbers, churches have been allowed to reconvene, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe that with sufficient COVID protocol observation, then elections should proceed. I'd like to state that for myself, I'm not a believer of these lockdown measures, especially in an economy such as ours, where it's highly informalized. It kind of deprives people of the right to earn a living. And this is in a tough environment as we speak. People are struggling to make ends meet, and most of the people are living from hand to mouth. So if you enforce lockdown measures, I believe that's a bit extreme. And therefore, I would not support or condone the suspension of elections based on COVID-19, on the pandemic, because pretty much everything else is going on. People are moving around from city to city. And I believe with enough measures put in place, we can safely have elections or by-elections.
Amanda, would you want to hazard to guess what is the reason behind why a government would push to stop elections?
That's a bit of a tricky one. It's a difficult one to try and put myself in those shoes. But to me, it smells like a rat. It really does. Because what could be the reason? I do think it must be some kind of stifling or I mean, there was a lot of odd behavior that took place around that time, with a lot of councillors being withdrawn and all sorts of things that were, hard to follow in that space. And then just the ban of elections, to me, it seems like an overexertion of power in that space, to say that, well, we don't want anything to happen or any challenges to come up in this space that we've created. So now we just have a standstill in terms of our elected members, and you see, we just now have a vacuum. And where there's a vacuum, it's very easy for anybody who's involved to push their own will, to push their own agenda. And to me, I think that would be the only reason why you would be so adamant to say, well, let's just stop this thing. Because I mean, even if you look at the SI that was passed, it says it's an indefinite period for as long as the COVID-19 disease remains to be an epidemic. that could be, that could take forever. And what it does is it leaves us at the mercy again of the government to then decide when is it safe now to have elections. And for me, I think that's the danger part of it. If it was done in such a way that it was a reviewable policy decision, perhaps maybe over a period of 2 or 3 months, to say that we're going to postpone this and put certain measures into place, put in a particular task force, direct ZEC to make a plan for how to do this, and we'll look at it again after 3 months. Maybe that would be a bit more understandable, because perhaps it happened at a time where there's a spike in cases. We're going into December at the time. If I'm not mistaken, this ban happened around October. Perhaps we could have understood and said, okay, maybe we need some time to actually plan this thing and how it's going to go along. We can't do it in December as we had planned. But to just indefinitely ban elections is extreme. And to me, I can't think of a way to justify it other than some kind of ulterior form of abuse or pushing a particular agenda that's not completely above board.
Yeah.
But again, this is speculating.
Yeah, sure. Thelma, you would want to ask a question. So I will take opening to the floor now. Thelma, you could just kindly turn on your video and ask the question that you would want to ask.
Okay, so my question in particular was to Jacob when he said that supermarkets are still open and other sections are. But even here in the UK, even from the first lockdown, supermarkets and health services and things like that, they're essential. You can't exactly expect them to shut down supermarkets, because if they do shut them, where are people being expected to get food, stuff and resources from? So as much as COVID-19 is getting things shut down and trying to minimize the risk of spreading of the disease, there's still some things that are regarded as essential. So I didn't understand what you meant when you say supermarkets are still open.
Jacob?
Yes, what I meant was that the structure of our society is that a lot of people get their things from their informal sector. They get the things from, not everybody can get access to a supermarket. There are smaller shops, there are informal sector places where people buy, even for transport. The mass transport system is not as organized as in the UK. And I was saying that this informal sector, where 70% of the population probably gets its stuff and also gets itself to make a living, needs to be opened in compliance with the regulations. If you can open large spaces like the supermarket, you probably can open the informal sector, provided that you regulate it adequately. And then nowhere in the world have they stopped elections. I've still to come to a place where they've suspended elections in the manner that has happened in Zimbabwe. And then And my comparison was that if you could regulate a place as large as a supermarket, you probably can regulate the conduct of people at an election, at a ballot box, bearing in mind that elections happen probably once every 5 years, or in the case of a by-election, once is when the vacancy falls due, and it never happens again. And most countries have been able to hold elections without Armageddon or apocalyptic results.
Amazing.
Okay,
you answered
thank you. Yes, thank you. It's just that it wasn't clear when you first said it. You weren't clear when you said the supermarket, but now I think you've elaborated and it now makes more sense. Thank you for that.
I will want to go to Dewa and say, Dewa, civic society mainly in Zimbabwe has been accused of taking political sides. And in this COVID pandemic, would you say that your assessment of the situation is fair as civil society that has tended to take sides politically with the opposition?
Well, Blessed, that accusation is nonsensical. That is nonsense upon stilts. What is happening is that as human rights activists, as civil society, we look to the government of the day to deliver on its obligations. Blessed, when we talk of human rights, the duty bearer is the government. So we go primarily to the government to hold them to account, to ask them to deliver. And this is where they then get this sense that perhaps we are anti-government. As activists, we are simply saying the institutions that have the responsibility to deliver are government institutions. So we cannot ask Securico, a private security company, to be accountable for policing in Zimbabwe. We have to go to a state institution, which is the police of Zimbabwe, and talk of brutality or excessive use of force. So we are there to hold the government to be accountable and to point out. And what we are saying is that as civil society and as Human Rights Watch, I will give you a specific example. We said as Human Rights Watch, we have got 3 young women from the opposition who claim that they were abducted, tortured, sexually abused, right? And we put those claims, very serious allegations, to the authorities. And we said, if you believe that civil society might be biased, of which we are not, then bring in international human rights experts. Zimbabwe is an active member of the UN system. So bring in the relevant special rapporteur from the UN to come inside Zimbabwe and investigate and present an impartial report. But the government has refused. I'll give you another example, Blessed. This one, on the 1st of August 2018, 7 people were shot and killed by Zimbabwe security forces on the streets of Harare in post-election violence. And as Human Rights Watch, we said, look, this is unacceptable. You cannot kill unarmed civilians in cold blood. And we said to President Mnangagwa, set up a commission of inquiry to look into these things, which is independent. And Mnangagwa himself, as the president, did set up a commission of inquiry, which was international in nature and scope, led by the former president of South Africa, Kgalema Motlanthe. And that commission of inquiry that included luminaries like Professor Lavuma Duku, Ambassador Cheryl Manyaruke, and others. It came out with findings, and it said, yes, civilians were killed as a result of the actions of the security forces, that is the army and the police. And it recommended a number of things. And this was a Mnangagwa commission of inquiry, not Human Rights Watch this time. We simply said, set it up, and they did. And the results in that report, which you can get anywhere in Harare, Blessed, were clear. They said, hold the soldiers to account, those that shot and killed people in Harare. Compensate the families of those that were killed. Compensate people who lost in that, fiasco. Carry out reforms in the law, carry out reforms in the electoral system. But blessed, none of that happened. Today, as we speak, those recommendations by Mnangagwa's own commission of inquiry have been ignored. And we are saying it's not acceptable. So we're not saying that you must only listen to us because we are Human Rights Watch and we are global and so on and so forth. But we're saying even the systems that are set up in Zimbabwe, blessed, look at the reports that have been put out by the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission that is ably led by Chairperson Elasto Mugwadi. Look at those reports. They are very clear about abuses, about the displacement of people, about the failings of the state to deliver on human rights. But have those reports been accepted and implemented? No. Look now at what's happening with the people of Chilonga. We are saying the state must follow due process of law, administrative justice. The constitution is clear, section 74, you cannot evict people without a court order that considers all issues. That's what we're saying. And if the government then says we are biased, but what are the people of Chilonga saying themselves? Now they've taken their own case to the High Court of Zimbabwe in Masvingo for the court to adjudicate on those issues. So I can challenge anyone anywhere in Zimbabwe about our impartiality and about the impeccability of our reports, the accuracy and the impartiality with which we approach issues. Because it's not only us as Human Rights Watch, but we are corroborated and we are supported in our findings by respected national institutions in Zimbabwe, like the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, like the Motlanthe Commission in terms of reports. So where we stand as civil society, I want to put this matter to rest. We are impartial, we are independent, and we talk of the human rights that are enshrined in the Constitution of Zimbabwe. We are not plucking them from thin air. These are rights that people of Zimbabwe, 94% overwhelmingly voted for in the 2013 Constitution. And these are rights, and it is about improving their livelihoods, about their human dignity, about equality and non-discrimination. And we're saying these are the issues. But the problem with the government of Zimbabwe and with ZANU-PF particularly is propaganda. They live and eat propaganda. They want to give a particular view, which is really not the reality. And they think that anyone who is critical is an enemy. This is the mentality of the war, of the liberation struggle, which must be gotten rid of, but they cannot go beyond that. They think that individuals must not be independent. This is why you see, blessed, that when doctors and nurses strike for better living conditions, for COVID-19 PPE equipment, they are labeled Western agents, and they are beaten up by the police, they are jailed, some of them, their leaders are tortured and hounded out of the country. Why? Because the government cannot accept that there are genuine issues coming from workers, from health workers, from teachers. Look at how activists in the teaching community like Obet Masaraure and others are being treated. They are viewed as enemies of the state. Activists are tortured. Look at Tatina Mombearara. Look at even the comedians, blessed, like Gonyet, Samantha Kurea. She dares poke fun at the police, and for that she is abused, she is beaten up, she's made to roll in raw sewage, to drink raw, all those things that are despicable. Why? Because she dares to speak out. So the problem in Zimbabwe is a failure to accept that people can assert their rights and speak out.
I see, Jackie, you're raising your hand. I'll just come to you quickly, Jackie, then I'll come to Tonio. Yes, Jackie.
Okay, thank you, Blessed. I want to respond quickly to Dewa and say that I think sometimes when there is criticism and it goes on overdrive, then there becomes a perception that the civic society in Zimbabwe is carrying out a hidden agenda, because sometimes they're overly antagonistic of government. And some of the things that are highlighted, they have no proof of, and they are not substantiated. He makes reference to the Joanna Mamombe, which scenario, the trio scenario and the abduction. which the government also came out to point out that there were certain inconsistencies in their narrative, which the civil society chooses to ignore. So at the end of the day, I do not think that they can stand and say we are impartial. They have been seen to use some words like regime, dictator, and so forth. And in the end, there's a perception even from government itself, which makes it also overly defensive of its stance. There's a perception that the civic society in Zimbabwe is driving a regime change agenda because they are not impartial. You cannot argue that you are impartial. There's no way, because you are seen to live in favor of one party and being antagonistic of the ruling party each and every day. There are incidences which I refer to. And there are things, I think earlier on before they were came in, I said, yes, there may be an equal action of the law in terms of the COVID-19 restrictions and regulations, but opposition actors themselves should take care not to breach our laws. There are laws in place for convening meetings. There are laws in place for convening gatherings. Ignored. People conduct what they call flash demonstration. What is a flash demonstration? It's illegal political gathering, which has not been sanctioned. We have seen the opposition conducting its rallies prior COVID-19 era when they are, but clearly when someone is doing something which is illegal, and then when they are arrested, it then becomes a human rights violation issue. It becomes if there is a concerted effort to demonize the government of Zimbabwe and to tarnish its image. And they themselves will then be justified in saying, no, these civic organizations are carrying out a regime change agenda. That is what agitating the population to uprise against the government of the day. And such a stance, I don't think anywhere in the world to a government which tolerates that. So in as much as the civil society would claim that, no, we are impartial, I'd like to disagree. I'd like to disagree strongly against that. Yes, indeed, there are incidents which you say, no, even I myself will agree that, no, you don't really need to do this kind of things. But in the end, when you're overly critical, day in and day out, you find something to nitpick on. And some of the issues are unsubstantiated or they are controversial, to put it in the list, then you also have to be seen to be objective. To say, okay, this is the counter evidence which is coming out in respect of the trio which were reportedly abducted. What do you say as a civic society about that? Do you look at it and weigh, or you just still insist that these people were abducted, even though the government also is saying we have evidence to exonerate ourselves? Are you looking at it objectively, or you're looking at it from a point of view of driving a certain theme? And this is then what agitates the government and puts it in a defensive mode to say, no, this civic society, they are not just about human rights. It's no longer just about human rights. It's no longer just about the welfare of the people, but it's a deeper and more sinister agenda. It's a regime change agenda. And then they will say we will not tolerate it. And I do not think anywhere in the world they would allow it.
But what about Itai? What about Itai, Tamara?
I'll go to Tonio, then I'll come back to the speakers. Tonio, you can ask your question, ask away.
Thank you so much, Blessed. I honestly have been following with great excitement and passion the exchanges that are going on. I was not hoping to be asking any questions, he said, but I'll pose this as a comment. Maybe after this, I don't know which organization my sister Jacqueline there is representing. I think that would be very interesting for me to also try and ask her questions if I know which constituents she has been defending. But when that is answered, I'll pose a comment, not a question, on the issue of having strong institutions in Zimbabwe. You know, when we're speaking of laws that are more equal, when some individuals are more equal to the law than others, I think it poses a very big danger here in Zimbabwe. We have seen this too many times, and the government and the lawmakers, they are not apologetic about such a scenario. Why do we have certain players who are allowed to violate the COVID restrictions, yet some players are arrested just at the instant of trying to violate that same law. It really doesn't make sense. Government in too many times in ZANU-PF aligned political parties and people, including MDCT players lately as well, they've managed to get some sort of security against COVID-19 violations. They are holding rallies. Leland Timbias this weekend was holding a very big rally, but the instant you hear a flash demo of 7-8 people, they are quickly bundled and they are arrested for violating COVID-19. I don't know how the justice system should work. Why is it when 4 people violate COVID-19 social distancing rules, they are arrested with 50 other people? Are we not then supposed to take the police also to court for doing that? Because you cannot arrest 4 people for violating COVID-19 regulations and then you bundle them as 50 as 100, and then you still present them before any law enforcement or any jury to then look into that and say you are in violation of COVID-19 social distancing, yet by you arresting them, you've been violating the same law. So you see that our problem here is some people have been allowed to be above the law, number one. Number two, the biggest problem that I think we've got here in Zimbabwe is we've got weak systems. There is a need to establish independent, strong systems that do not need to rely on the government for their funding, for their support, and for their day-to-day running. Because the moment you've got an institution that relies on a government payroll or assistance, yes, it could be a standalone institution, but it's dependent. So once you are dependent, you are not a strong institution, neither are you also independent, because financially you are getting that money directly as well from the government. So it becomes very difficult and tricky for you to have strong systems, unlike any other countries across the world. You can't then ask the police officers, in as much as they may want. Maybe our police officers would want to arrest people who are at his ZANU-PF rally. Let's look at what happened in Kwekwe recently. We saw the violence and everything. No one was arrested for holding that rally in the first place. Police officers were killed, they were beaten up, but up until now, no one was arrested. Let's take the same issue. We have got 5 people who are trying to address media at an MDC event. All of those people, including journalists, are arrested. I represent the media side. I don't represent any single political party, but I'm simply saying we need to have strong institutions in Zimbabwe, whereby if the police would want to arrest ZANU-PF people, they do not need to report to ZANU-PF people to arrest ZANU-PF people. These institutions are not strong, they are not independent, and I think that needs to be addressed. That's the biggest problem that we're having here in Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much. Now, as we are fast running out of time, the conversation is getting heated, but I've got Amanda who's raising her hand. I will allow her to go. Then Dewa to just respond to Jacqueline. Then I will allow us to give our closing remarks.
I think this is also close to a closing remark, but I did want to take it back to something that Jacqueline had said before. You know, I understand the need to balance out a conversation, but I must say, in my opinion, there can never be such a thing as an over-criticism of the government. I think that is our job in a democracy. They've been given an incredible amount of power. That's the entire concept of it. We give up our decision-making powers for the greater collective. We must scrutinize every single thing that they do and hold them to a particular standard. I don't think that civil society has a big duty to be impartial in that regard. They have to vigorously, you know, essentially keep the government on their toes in light of almost everything. And so I don't know, I don't think they have much of a duty to not be biased. I do agree on the part that once you now become a mouthpiece for, say, just an opposition party, and it now just becomes, you know, conversations and behavior that doesn't take anybody anywhere. It's just to say we don't like this just because the government did it. That's now an extreme level of opposition that has no good. But I don't think, I would be very slow to criticize people who are speaking out against certain practices when it's directed to somebody who's been placed in power. You know, in many democracies, you know, those people are held to such a high standard, such that they are open to certain criticisms. You know, the debates that were around, you know, what was this, that those Piro paintings where Jacob Zuma was depicted with, you know, Mkhonto Wesizwe, all those kind of things. And the South African democracy said, you know, you are the president. You are open to criticism. You're open to satire. You are even open to be mocked, because you've been put in a position of power and you must be held accountable. We can never get to a stage where we're saying, oh no, certain people shouldn't be criticized in a particular way, especially when they hold particular positions. So I think that's just my take on that exchange that was there. And yeah, I'll keep it brief.
Thank you very much. Deo, just briefly, you were interested in offering a response?
Yes, and I fully agree with Amanda. You know, the government of Zimbabwe has got this atrocious sense of entitlement that they cannot be criticized because they are who? People have a right to say and speak their minds. That is what human rights are all about. Now, the matter that Jackie raised about the MDC young women, those are serious allegations that were made. And we said, yes, they are contesting views as civil society. This is why, as Human Rights Watch, we said, can we have an outside, respected, independent institution to investigate, like the United Nations? Because it is in Zimbabwe, it has got offices there. And so we are not ignoring the views from the government, but we are saying the government is not independent. The police are not independent because they are implicated in the abuses. So they cannot investigate themselves. And this is why we have repeatedly said, put in place a constitutional independent complaints mechanism that can receive complaints from the public about the rogue conduct of the police and the army. And since 1980, there has only been one regime change that took place in Zimbabwe in November 2017, led by the army. It was a coup. So the regime change agents in Zimbabwe are in the army. This is where we have received the toppling of Robert Mugabe. It was by the army, not by civil society. So let's not try to point fingers. The government must accept that civil society and citizens have got rights to be critical, to complain and to demand services, to demand accountability, to demand an end to corruption. But the problem with this ZANU-PF government is this Chinu-Chenu mentality, that they cannot be criticized because they went to war, because they think they own Zimbabwe and the citizens of Zimbabwe. That will come to an end. And as human rights activists, we will always say, we demand and we express ourselves whether they like it or not.
We here at Heart and Soul TV and Radio, we believe in free speech and with our partners, our Frederick Newman Foundation. And we are bringing you this series of free talks that are going to run throughout the month of March, where we are going to be engaging on various topics about our socio-political discourse in this country. And our next topic, next week, we will be discussing about dialogue. Is it a mirage or the solution to Zimbabwe's challenges? And today, I'm joined by an amazing panel of human rights activist, Deo Mavinga, lawyer, and I think it's an amazing cast of lawyers, Amanda Ndlovu, who practices law in the city of Bulawayo, Jacqueline Sande, who practices in Harare, and Jacob Bafume, who particularly was invited to this conversation as the mayor of Harare, albeit suspended. Now, before we came to this discussion, we went to the streets of Harare and we asked a number of people, what do they think about law being used to entrench dictatorship? And some of them had mixed feelings. They believed that the law that was brought in as a COVID mitigation was an important aspect that protected and defended lives. But they said, in the absence of dealing with issues that include hunger, that include earnings in terms of people wanting to pay rentals and stuff like that, the laws became an oppression in itself because it neglected serious aspects of their livelihoods. But they were happy that the government put their lives in front and to try and save them. So we're going to listen to those voices. And after we listen to those voices, I'm going to ask our panelists to just put their closing remarks, their closing arguments.
I think it depends on how you see the whole thing. Because if we look for Casey, the likes of DJ Fantan, the government was really above board in arresting those people. Because you realize we're dealing with a global pandemic right now, and we don't even have a cure for that pandemic. My vaccines are as much as we are being told and everything. We're not even certain could they protect us from the COVID-19 virus. So the government, it has to be, more thorough in enforcing the law in as far as these COVID regulations are concerned. But then it also some issues to do with, some political actors. Like recently we had an issue, Honorable Themba Mliswa. I saw a certain affidavit on social media. He was saying the people who were at his residence, they were less than 50, and it was actually a private residence. So I don't really get why you would go to someone's house and arrest them when they are within the COVID-19 regulations. And as much as I'm not privy to the Joanna Mamombe issue of and all that, I would also like to believe the public, we have a tendency of politicizing things where the government is doing justice for the sake of its people.
Well, I think our position has been clear as human rights lawyers over the years that we've seen that there's continued selective application of the law. The recent case that you may be following now, which is actually supposed to be in court today, involving the three MDC Alliance youth female leaders, Joanna Mamumbe, Cecilia Chimbiri, and Nitsai Marova, clearly shows that selective application of the law is real. We have three ladies who are supposed to have participated in a press conference outside this court on a certain day. And as they were actually going through their press conference, they were joined by a very senior lawyer who is also part of the Pollard platform, the one that is dealing with the dialogue between the political parties. He joins in the press conference. There's a video that is circulating of him in that press conference as well as other people. But the police then decide to arrest two of the ladies, Joanna Mamombe and Cecilia Chimbiri. And the leader of that political outfit, Professor Maduku, actually accompanies the ladies to the police station and says, if you are arresting them, which I understand you want to do, then you should also arrest me because I was part of that press conference. And he's advised that there are no instructions to arrest him. So it clearly shows that the law is selectively applied against certain people. And from the trends over the years, it's normally applied against those that are deemed to be anti-government, the ones that are said to be dissenting voices against the government, or the one the one person or the ones that are very vocal against the actions of certain key political figures, or even the ruling party, or even ZANU-PF at times. So the problem of selective application of the law is a challenge that we have that has been there before the 20 November, the 2017 November events, and it continues even after the change of government, which I would not want to go into. But more importantly for us is the fact that the constitution that we all voted for in 2013 is very clear in terms of how everyone should be treated in Zimbabwe. And it talks about everyone having the right to equal protection of the law. And obviously what comes with that right is not to be selectively discriminated and not for the law to be applied selectively. But the Constitution is also founded on certain tenets. There are certain objectives in the Constitution of gender equality. And in this case, which comes during the month where we are celebrating International Women's Day, you then see 2 females being arrested and the male who volunteers to be arrested not being arrested. So there's also the element of gender discrimination there. And the women who choose to challenge are then targeted. But we have a broader issue other than the fact that the police are not implementing the constitution as they should be, which should be that when they implement the constitution, they should actually respect human rights. And human rights include issues of equality, protection of the law, and affording those who want to express themselves that right to freedom of expression. And not for them to be worried that after asserting their right to freedom of expression, there will be no freedom after expression. So we have this challenge, and we continue as human rights lawyers that I speak on behalf of to say they should reform some key institutions that are there to support the rule of law and democracy. The police is supposed to be there to be enforcing the law as according to its mandate in the Constitution. But you see that there are blatant violations of the Constitution, and it becomes a problem for the government to then say, no, there are certain elements within the society that are trying to tarnish the image. And yet the basic needs that we've been talking about, reforming certain institutions, complying with the Constitution, respecting human rights and the rule of law are not being followed.
Listen, I'm a legislator, and there are structures in the country that deal with the fairness of any issue. There are 3 pillars of the state: the executive, judiciary, and the legislature, and each one has a role to play to ensure that there is fairness. And I have no doubt that the truth will come out. It's just that it takes time. Like Mr. Ungwe said, this is just the Magistrates Court. There's the High Court, there's the Supreme Court, there's the Constitutional Court, and that's the reason why we have those pillars to be able to put this whole argument before a proper court. And I've no doubt that justice will prevail at the end of the day. Not for me, but for many others, because the precedence has got to be set. The way the law is applied has not been fair. So I think we now need to have people not abusing certain statutory instruments to achieve their personal goals and so forth. We are politicians and we have our own fights, but I don't think we should now reduce to institutions being used to also fight one. If I've insulted you as a minister, then sue me. But you don't use the state apparatus to be able to do that. I'm a legislator. I have the right to represent people. If the Commissioner General of Police, Goodwin Matanga, is being accused of being corrupt in tender procurement, I raise these issues for national interest, because the President is very clear on zero tolerance on corruption. So if we don't speak for the people, who will speak?
Well, I can't speak in general terms, and I can't speak for every other person who has been the subject of the law in Zimbabwe. But what I can do is that I can only speak for my clients. In this case, I have come to court in respect of the matter relating to Joanna Mamombe and others. My clients obviously do not believe that they are being treated fairly by the state machinery, and they believe that they are victims of machinations of certain elements and interests in our state. So, for instance, I give you an example. One of the cases that we are here for is that relating to Joanna Mamombe having made a press statement outside court about a week ago. They then got arrested. But at the time of arrest, what they were told was that there was instructions to arrest Joanna Mamombe and Cecilia Chimbiri and leave out everybody else. Yet at that press meeting, there were several other people who were there and who presented themselves to the police and were ready to be arrested for the same cause. But to their surprise and disbelief, they were told that the instructions were only in relation to Joanna and Cecilia. So it surprises everyone, and it must upset every right-thinking person that the law is being applied selectively. At least that's the conclusion that our clients have reached in that regard, why they are being targeted.
I will start with you, Amanda. Your closing argument.
Just as a closing remark, I'd say that I think we've come a long way as a country, and I like to close off on a hopeful note to say that the more we have these conversations, the more we engage with each other. I like the topic of the next conversation to say dialogue. Is it a mirage? I do think it is something that can take us a bit further. And the more that we understand that this is a space for everybody, not just for lawyers, not just for, activists, not just for politicians. I think the closer we become to a balanced society. And so I'd like to just keep up the hope. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you very much. Amazing. It's amazing what Clubhouse can do. Amazing conversations that I've had with Amanda. I'm hoping that we can continue having these conversations, and you'll be able also to join in the next conversation that we'll be having. We'll send out the Zoom link so that you can also be on the stage and ask questions or offer your views from the stage. Now I'll go to Dewa. Maybe because Jackie wants to leave, so I'll ask Jackie to give her closing remarks first.
All right, thank you very much. I think that these discussions are quite important, and maybe just going back to Dewa and to Amanda to say that engagement and dialogue is crucial, but criticism is also acceptable. But where one is criticizing just because it's been done by the regime or the dictatorship and such kind of language, and where the government of Zimbabwe is seemingly held to a higher standard of, the higher standard than any other country in terms of those human rights observations or respect or upholding of human rights. Yes, we all want our country to achieve that higher level, but then seems like there are double standards being applied, and then it actually detracts from the objectives and from the goals of the civil society, in that once you are then deemed to be anti-government and pro-opposition, that you're only opposing because it's ZANU-PF which is in power and you do not like ZANU-PF, then you may not achieve much. But rather, if you're going to engage them and dialogue with them, I think more will then be achieved, rather than when you are deemed not to be impartial and biased. Those would be my parting words.
But you didn't address the topic of the day in your parting words. Is law the cement?
All right. In terms of the law, I think, like I said earlier on, for me, COVID lockdown restrictions are a bit too heavy-handed in respect of our country and in respect of the numbers. We could have done more. We could have achieved more, maybe by closing off the borders, restricted movement into the country, rather than restricting movement inside the country, because the people who will be affected the most are those in the formal sector. There has been no bailout. And also, I've observed and I've taken note, and I do not condone the selective application of the law in terms of movement and in terms of gatherings, where we have seen government officials convening gatherings outside of the COVID-19 restrictions and regulations, yet the same is not allowed to those in the opposition. That then is problematic, in that in a country such as ours, which is viewed as a democracy, it will seem like they're stifling opposing voices.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I'll Dewa, to you.
Thank you so much. And I wish to fully agree with Jackie's closing remarks, particularly about how the law has been used in an excessive way in Zimbabwe, and a failure to have homegrown solutions that are applicable, particularly to the Zimbabwe situation, where the majority of the citizens are dependent on the informal economy. Because we must accept that Zimbabwe is not the UK or the US or any other place. Zimbabwe must address its peculiar needs by its people. The law ordinarily should be neutral, but sometimes it is used in a wrong way. So we need to continue to keep the government on its toes, to say, please apply the law in a way that addresses the challenges of the people of Zimbabwe, that secures their livelihoods and enables them to live lives of dignity. The government must support vulnerable communities. That is not happening. So in other countries, they can afford lockdowns because people get packages. Like in South Africa, they get food parcels. In Zimbabwe, it's not happening. So we need to have a Zimbabwe that is governed and guided by the values of Ubuntu, Wunu, in the constitution, which are basically human rights values. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacob, I'll come to you, Jacob, for your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Lovely discussion, Dewa and Jackie. I think the point has been made that we need the opening up of democratic space. We need elections as soon as yesterday. We need the courts to do their job. We need selective application of the law to stop. We need the persecution of the trio of the girls from the MDC Alliance to stop. We need the selective application of the law against MDC Alliance to stop. We have to stop the criminalization of being an MDC Alliance member. A lot of things were done to the MDC Alliance during the lockdown. Our headquarters were taken away. Our MPs were taken away. The courts seemed only to function when it came to depriving us of our political rights. So we need that to stop. We also need people's livelihoods to be enabled. The combi operators, the informal sector, and various sectors of the economy that have been shut down indiscriminately and completely. Those need to be opened up. We are going to have a bigger problem in terms of the social disinvestment that is occurring in those sectors and the need to cater for the economic displacement that is happening in our informal sector. But otherwise, I think the point has to be made and has to be driven home hard that the government has fallen short and has fallen short miserably. It has performed below expectation and has set the bar very low in terms of the standard that is expected from a democratic government.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the amazing panelists who joined me this evening to discuss the issue of is law the center of dictatorships in Zimbabwe? It is an amazing opportunity to have this discussion, and I was particularly happy that I managed to get amazing women on this panel without as much as putting serious effort, because this has been an issue that women's voices have been excluded in the media, and it is always an amazing time to have a panel that has amazing, great minds. And I'm so blessed to have hosted you guys this evening. This program was brought to you by Frederick Newman Foundation in partnership with Heart and Soul TV and Radio. And I am your host, Blessed Dara Mhlanga. This is Free Talk in partnership with Frederick Newman Foundation, our partners in free speech. Free speech is the center of development of any nation.